Thank you for standing by and welcome to today's presentation, Fundamentals of Safety Management 101, Effective Communication. Our presenter today is Christy Loisel. Christy is a risk control consultant at Alliant Insurance Services, where she provides web-based and in-person training programs, as well as on-site consultative services for clients. Since joining Alliant in 2009, she has held a range of responsibilities, including oversight for the risk control programs and the online learning series, which produces 24 webinars annually. Christy is going to be joined by Tim Leach. Tim is the Director of Risk Control Consulting with Alliant Insurance. I will now turn the program over to Christy.
Well, thank you, Ray, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. I want to thank you for joining us for our effective communication presentation. I'd like to get started, first of all, with a polling question. So, Ray, if you want to kick things off for us and open it up.
All right, and for our first polling question of today, how would you rate your organization's communication? We got this, 10 out of 10 stars, pretty good. We rate at least a 7, average, some departments are better than others, not great, it breaks down quite often, and help, what are we doing wrong? And I'll give everyone a couple of seconds to go ahead and answer that before closing the poll. All right, and the results of the poll, 4% answered, we got this, 10 out of 10 stars. 36% stated pretty good, we rate at least a 7. 50% said average, some departments are better than others. 7% not great, and 4% help.
Okay. Well, I certainly understand that. I know communication can break down quite easily in organizations. And this is such a broad topic. You know, I could spend hours and hours upon communication, but again, would that really be effective for all of you? So we're going to focus really on communication as it pertains more to safety and the safety environment. Okay, let's talk. What is communication? It's essentially, if we want to, define it, it's the act or process of using words. We use sounds, we use signs, even behaviors to express or exchange our ideas, our thoughts, sometimes our feelings to someone else or to a group of people, right? But the problem and the key word here is effective. The adjective, which basically says, is that person or is that group receiving that information and understanding it? And then if you're trying to convince somebody of something or explain a thought, are you producing that desired effect or decisive action that you're looking for? Communication flows both ways, right? We've got the giving and we've got the receiving of it. It's interactive. And when our communication is not effective, we call that miscommunication, which I think a lot of you are familiar with. So let's talk about the miscommunication for a moment so we can understand a little bit better about how we can improve this. Now, I'm not going to focus a lot on the written portion of communication today. It's a whole different topic. It takes a lot of skill development in order to do that. We're going to be talking more about our face-to-face type interaction. But I did want to bring up the email because I know it's a big issue for many of us. There are over 319 billion emails exchanged in the world daily. And if you're like me or my manager, we're receiving 100 to plus. It says 122 on average, but let's face it, how many of those are really important information? A lot of it's some spam, some, oh, that's nice to know, but I don't have time for that. It's not important enough for us to read it. And yet we spend nearly 30% of our time on email. It's kind of an email overload, shall we say. I'd like to see kind of a show of hands. If you guys could open up your panels for me, and there's a little thing there that says raise hand. Now, this is only if this applies. How many of you spend unnecessary time with 2 or 3 follow-up emails where you feel like you're having to clarify or explain yourself further or a situation? So raise your hand if you feel that is you when it comes to email.
All right, it looks like we had about 15 raised hands on that question.
Okay, well, some of you are maybe more adept at writing your emails than others. I do find that this is basically our go-to method of communication. The majority of us who do receive a lot of emails, we tend to go back and forth with our emails quite a bit. And it becomes this really long, messy email thread of information. So make your emails essentially some tips here, concise, maybe 4 to 5 sentences, give them just what they need. You don't need to go into a lot of detail of how you came to that conclusion necessarily, but just get to the meat of what you need to communicate. If you have more than one question to ask in an email, it may be a better option just to pick up the phone, okay? Or use an alternative communication method. Maybe you guys use Microsoft Teams, or you have a chat option or Jabber that you can communicate, or video conferencing like we're doing today. Pick up the phone or schedule a call, do something that is going to be a little more effective than the back and forth email situation. All right, so let's kind of get into this. Why does our communication fail? Let's talk a little bit about that. Kind of a funny here is, I'm sorry I wasn't listening. Can you repeat everything you've told me since you first started working here? Okay, we hope that's not the case. But again, we're just listening is a big portion of this, and we are going to talk about that today. But more importantly, I think what organizations and departments fail to do is they don't set expectations. You don't have a common goal or a primary goal that you're working towards, and thus there are no objectives that your employees need to meet. So maybe your goal is to reduce claims by 10% within the first year or first 6 months, or whatever that goal is. Everybody now has a role, and knowing what they need to accomplish to do that, and you have outlined steps and objectives. Safety committees are another example of this, where I think, those of you who were at our safety committee webinar a few months ago kind of realized that, our safety committees aren't so great. Now, why is that? Did we not set up a common established goal of why is it we're meeting here, and what are the objectives we're going to accomplish each time we meet? So I think these are kind of some of the reasons why our communication is not effective. So for communication to be effective, we need to develop some additional skills. Now, these, for most of us, do not come easy, all right? They do take some practice, they take some development. I have several of them that we're going to discuss today, but I'm not going to be able to go into extreme detail on all of these. We're really going to hit 3 of them, probably a little harder than others. One is the nonverbal communication, okay? Second is one you may not be as familiar with, and it's called emotional awareness. Like I said, that's another pretty deep topic, and we don't have time to spend hours on it, but we will touch upon it today. Listening is key. How many of you feel like you get interrupted, no one's listening to you, or you're trying to communicate something and it's just not being heard by your organization? Questioning skills, there is a method to that madness as well. And we'll talk about how we can apply all of these areas in mainly the safety environment and within your organization. All right, let's get started. So nonverbal communication, 90% of our communication is nonverbal, or body language, right? So it's not really what we're saying verbally, it's how am I looking to you? Am I closed off? How are my body language and what I'm telling you with my body different than what I'm saying? So here's a few examples I put up. Facial expressions. I can sit here and tell you, I'm so excited to be talking to you today about effective communication. My face really doesn't say I'm excited though, right? So I'm not matching what I'm saying with my facial expression. Gestures are another one. If you're standing with, fists clenched, you can tell somebody's a little frustrated, or they seem tense or tight. Gestures are another thing you can read from people to tell how they're feeling, what they're experiencing at that moment when you're trying to communicate with them. And then the vocal communication. So for instance, if I use or ask you a question, where have you been? Okay, I'm saying in a calm tone manner. But if I say, where have you been? You're in trouble or there's a problem. Or where have you been? As in I'm so worried about you. So your tone, your inflection, how loud you are can also have an impact on what you're not saying. And then body posture. The proverbial, the arms crossed, standing back sitting back in your chair, giving those signs that maybe you're not interested or that you are interested. And then proxemetics, your personal space. Do you have someone get a little too close to you when you're trying to talk with them? Maybe shows a little bit too aggressiveness or dominance. That's one area that's telling you, "Ooh, watch out, this guy or girl seems a bit off, a little too close." Eye gaze. Eye gaze can tell a lot. If I'm looking at you and you're speaking to me, am I looking intently at you and really paying close attention? Sometimes that conveys a message of trust or mistrust. And of course, whether you're interested in what I have to say or not. And then haptics, anything that has to do with maybe a handshake. You ever shake someone's hand and it's not a really firm handshake? Sometimes that conveys a message of assertiveness, confidence, whereas a handshake that is not firm may be a sign of somebody is maybe a little shy or a little more reserved. It can tell a lot about people. Appearance. Maybe some of you don't want to admit this, but your appearance really does say a lot about what you're trying to convey. Now, if I showed up today and I had my hair all in disarray and, a ripped up t-shirt that was stains down the front, you'd be like, who is this person? And didn't she bother to even shower or get ready for today's presentation? It conveys a message that I'm really not ready for the day. I don't really care. Maybe I've been working too many hours. Maybe if I've had a new baby and I had no sleep, it's conveying a message of I need some more sleep. Again, it can convey a lot of messages, not just what you wear, but overall how you're presenting yourself in appearance. All right, so the application of this, and I'm going to bring Tim on the next slide here, but just a few kind of things to prompt you with thinking. What are you saying with that nonverbal communication? Think of yourself, think of others that are their kind of nonverbal communication. Is it sending the right message? Is it saying I'm approachable? Maybe people don't approach you because you're sending them the wrong message. So something to think about. And are you engaged with the person one-on-one? So I brought Tim, my director of Alliant Risk Control Consulting, in on this. And Tim, when I think of verbal communication, I think a lot of training sessions because you're trying to read your audience, right? And we rely upon training as a means of communication in safety, but again, is it effective? What's been your experience in this area?
Yeah, I have a couple of examples that I'd like to share. The first one, training really for me, the nonverbal really is where it plays part mostly. And so when I go into a room and I have a big room that we're providing some training in a group session, I'll scan the room and look for the individuals that maybe have their arms crossed, or sometimes you'll overhear conversations, which is nonverbal, but you'll hear them talking to other people or just not being present. They're more concerned about grabbing a donut and a coffee or something of that nature as opposed to being there. Now, personally, what I do to try to break that down a little bit is at the front of the training is to make sure and express the importance of the training. Asking people to put aside things such as cell phones and things of that nature that could distract them. But also those folks that are just sitting there and maybe they're not participating, I look for opportunities to engage them in the training. One of my things with regard to training is that I think as safety professionals, oftentimes we feel like we have to hit every technical piece. Well, the fact of the matter is that people aren't going to remember most of those things. So I want to bring them in and I want to have an application that they're going to take with them, whether it's through a story or an example, or asking for their opinion so they have buy-in into a solution to the topic that we're addressing. The second one that I wanted to mention was, it's kind of funny. It's fairly early on in my career when I think it's okay to share the client. It was actually Ocean Pacific, if you remember that brand, that clothing brand. In Southern California, they had an area where they were doing actually sewing and things of that nature. And the client asked me to come and provide training on back injury prevention. Well, if not all, a very large majority of the individuals were not English speaking in the room. They brought me in, I stood on a sewing table in the middle of this room, And then I had these people sitting around me, and when I was talking, they would just smile and do this because they hadn't a clue what I was talking about. So, sometimes, they wanted to be engaged. It's just that the guy that was standing on the table just didn't speak the language. So you want to also make sure that, sometimes the cues can give you a positive feedback or reinforcement, but make sure that you take it in that they're really absorbing what you're delivering.
Good example. Absolutely. Know your audience, I think, is the ultimate tip on that one as well. So yeah, definitely good input, and, ways to counteract that. We know how we can misread our audience as well. So good to know. All right, so let's move on to listening. Listening, of course, as we know, is not the same as hearing. You can hear me, but you may not be focused. You may not be completely, zoned in on me. You may be over here texting. You might be over here on your answering an email, or someone's walked into your office. You might be hearing me, but you may not be fully listening to me. On any given day, about 70% of our time is spent in some sort of communication. Now, that may be writing, which again, these are averages, 9% writing, 16% may be reading, 30% speaking, and 45% listening. Now, again, depending on what your job is to do every day, maybe you're doing a little more or less of that. But that just gives you an idea of what portion of our waking hours are spent. And as you can see, listening is a big portion of it. So what are the types of things we're listening for? Well, a lot of us are listening for information. You may have joined today because you're trying to be trained. You want to learn something new. Maybe you're watching the news or trying to solve a technical problem with the IT department. Those are informational type listening. You have your critical listening was going to be for evaluating. Maybe you're trying to solve a problem in a specific department or your own department, or you're trying to come to a conclusion or a decision on something. It's going to require more critical thinking, more fact finding. Okay. And it's important to be zoned in, tuned in to what that person is saying. The last one, therapeutic. Now, this one is often missed because I think unless you're a therapist or you feel like you have a type of job that requires you to have that type of empathy or that compassionate understanding of someone, you think maybe it doesn't apply to you. But let me tell you, if you're a manager, this is a great skill set to really develop, because most of us do not take an active role, or they don't feel like it's their part in the business world to have that therapeutic listening. But again, our employees are humans, right? They come in, they may have an issue that they brought from home, and it's kind of carrying into the workforce. So maybe it's time to read what that person is going through by their body language. Pull them aside and see if there's something you can listen to and talk out with them that may help them. All right, now this I debated on here, but maybe some of you do need to hear this. Okay, have you ever spoken to someone or a group and you're near the end of your thought or your idea, and the faces look blank, and you're like, did they just completely miss what I said? Were they daydreaming? Did I talk for too long? Again, if you're in a training session, show that you're engaged, okay? Communication is a two-way street, right? You need to kind of show the engagement, mirror those facial expressions. You don't have to be cheesy about it, but again, show that excitement, that interest, whatever it is. Ask a few relevant questions. If you're not really good at remembering details, it doesn't hurt to jot down a few notes if it's something that's important that you want to remember. Okay, it's confirming that you heard what the speaker was saying. Now, I have an activity. Unfortunately, we don't have time. We don't have the ability to split out our groups today. But if we did, this is the activity that I think you would find most beneficial. Now, this is something you can do either at home, or maybe you've got a coworker. Most of you may be still working from home. So if you do, here's what you're going to do. There's going to be a listener, and there's going to be someone speaking. The listener is not going to respond at all. Facial expressions are okay. You can nod. They're going to listen to the words for 2 minutes, okay? You're not going to judge. You're not going to fix. You're not going to offer advice, and you're not going to interpret. Not easy to do, but try this at home. What the question is that the person speaking is going to be answering is, how was your day today? Now, at my house, My husband, if I ask that and he asks that and I respond, he likes to come in with some fixes. But sometimes people just want to be heard, not just females, but males. We all want to be heard and listened to. Try that, then switch roles and see if you can do it. It's not an easy task to do, but it's a good exercise in listening. All right, so application of listening in the business world, in your job and your everyday kind of experiences. I've put down some things that if you're not familiar, you should be, but if you're not, I've spelled them out for you. You've got interaction on one side. If someone interrupts your response, what is it you immediately think? You're not hearing me. You're not listening to me. So keep that in mind if you're doing some interrupting. I know I find myself doing that a little too much myself. Jumping to conclusions. Maybe you think you know the end of this story and what it's going to be, but wait until somebody's finished, okay? That's telling me, again, you're not hearing me. Wait till I've finished my thought. Talking too much. Today, when I'm speaking to you, I feel like I'm speaking a little too much, but I'm, again, training. That is my role in this, is to do more talking than listening. But that can convey a message to the other person or your group. You don't really care what I have to say, do you? That's kind of what I'm implying if I'm listening. All right, if I'm providing an unrelated response to what a speaker has just said, that translation to me is you're not interested and you really don't have the time to address my concerns right now. So remember, keep in mind what you're doing and how it affects your employees. A better application of this is let the speaker finish. It lets them know, it gives that affirmation that they've been heard. In fact, compliment the speaker if you feel it's, warranted. That's a great idea. I'd like to talk to you more about it. If you could come by my office at 4:45 today, that would be great. It lets them know you've heard them. You don't necessarily have the time right now, but you would like to hear them out. Okay. And then ask some questions. It shows that you're interested and you're engaged and that you're really thinking about what that person said. All right, so now we get to a little bit more of the application. And again, we like to use real life experiences here. I know Tim has a good 20 years more experience than me. That doesn't mean he's 20 years older, just that he has more experience in this industry. So Tim, do you have some input in this area with listening?
Yeah, but first I want to thank you for that indirect message about how I should listen to my wife. It's been 30 years. I think maybe I might have hopefully have figured out that I can't fix everything. But at any rate, what I find in safety, I feel personally, we tend to compartmentalize things. So, we have this list of tasks that we've got to do. We got to do inspections and training and the list goes on, all these things that we have to do. And we by doing that, we think, okay, we're doing a great job. We're doing our safety things. Well, the situation that I ran into, and this was years ago, I worked for a large organization. I was I came into the organization as an environmental health and safety engineer, overseeing about 1,000 people. And that was consisting of construction and the facilities maintenance and all the trades, if you will, and the custodial staff, so on and so forth. And it just so happened that it was pretty normal in this situation that the new guy always got this group of people, right? Because they were the black sheep of the organization. They had the worst accident record. It felt like the other engineers that worked with them felt like they weren't getting anywhere. The other thing that happened in that organization, though, it was a matter of practice. There was probably 10,000 people at this site on this campus, and so there was another 7 or 8 safety people on staff. Well, it just so happens that their mode of operation was basically sitting at their desk all day and firing out memos, do this and do that. And what I found was early on is that they had safety committees. They had 6 safety committees in this group a month, and they had 3 labor and 3 management committees, one for each shift, right? So twice a month I was there for all around the whole shifts doing this safety committee. Now that lasted about maybe a month, because I recognized through verbal communication, through the nonverbal, and through listening that this was an absolute waste of time, and we got that changed. But one of the things that I shifted and did that I think was really, really effective was I went out and I left all my stuff like clipboards, cameras, all that junk. I left it at the office, and I started just interacting, not just with management on a daily basis in their morning management meetings, but I started riding around with the custodians, or going to a job site that was happening where they're fixing something, and just talking with them and listening to what their concerns were, what did they run into, why are they having problems. And we turned that organization, for a number of reasons, from the worst to the best performing in a year and a half. Not only in that campus, but in the whole organization. And it wasn't just because it wasn't just me. It was just changing the mode of how we went about doing safety. And I think one of the things that we can do as safety professionals is, put all the stereotypes or all the kind of the normal things aside and just go out and interact with people. And what I found there was that when I would be sitting in my office, oftentimes someone would come knock on the door and say, "Hey, Tim, could you come out and help us with something and look at this?" And when you get to that point that you're making an impact and helping improve safety in the work site. So listen.
Yeah, good application. I think sometimes you need some good examples of how to apply your listening, not just on one-on-one interaction, but even with your group of people that you're working with, the people that you're trying to keep safe in the workforce. All right, so I said we talk a little bit about the emotional awareness. And if you're a leader or a manager, this is a really great skill set to develop, and it does take some time. So this quote I have up is by Daniel Goleman. If you are tuned out of your own emotions, you will be poor at reading them in other people. Now, Daniel Goleman is a psychologist. He's an author of a New York Times bestseller. I'm not necessarily trying to push his book, but it is one of the more prominent books that have been out there. It was translated into 40 different languages. And the reason I bring that up is because there are different theories about emotional awareness. If you're not familiar with what it is, it's the ability to identify the emotions you're experiencing at any given time. Now that's, of course, in its very simplistic form as far as a definition goes. But if I want to even oversimplify this further, it's the intelligent use of your emotions, okay? And if you're able to identify them in yourself, you can identify them in other people in your workforce. Now, as I mentioned, there's multiple theories. I'm not going to get into every one of them, but the one that was most prominent is Daniel Goleman's, and he has these 5 different components of emotional intelligence. And I don't have time to go into all of this because it is kind of deep. It gets into a lot of things that may or may not be applicable today. So I do want to at least let you know there are some benefits to this, and there are assessment tools out there. You can measure your emotional quotient if you'd like with assessment tools. But people do claim that there's some good mental and physical health benefits. It can improve your interpersonal communication. And at the very end, I do have some resources if you'd like to click on them and find out a little bit more, or contact me, you definitely can. But those 5 components are more of development, more in yourself, not necessarily in your employees. So that self-awareness may be your physical, it may be your emotions, your actions, and then you have the ability to self-regulate or not self-regulate. Can you control and redirect your own emotions and impulses? So again, it goes down a lot of information, and we don't have the time to go through all of it today, but it is something worth investigating and worth reading.
Christy, before we move on, I do have a quick one, hopefully. It's not necessarily directly safety oriented, though it started in that fashion. But I had a situation, and it was with an employee of mine, and essentially I would go out to, now he basically lost my trust early on because essentially he lied to me. And I was real frustrated. The relationship was contentious. And I kind of pride myself and I strive to have a good working relationship, and Christy will nod her head because she wants me to believe that, and have a good relationship with is I want everybody to have a life balance, right, with work. This guy, I mean, just the sight of him just kind of got me heated. And when I would go out to his cube, I mean, he literally would jump out of his skin because he was on edge as well. So we were both in this situation. Well, at the time I was a certified trainer, and we were doing this workshop training within Alliant, and it was called the Orange Frog Workshop, if you will. And there's this part of this training where these heron they'd swoop up on these frogs, and of course all the frogs were just really nervous. Well, so I'm going through this training, unrelated individual, and as I'm going through it with the audience, this thought came about me, and it was like, oh my God, I'm his heron. You know, that every time he sees me, he just like shudders, right? So I had to go and correct that situation. Actually, I apologize and let him know that, hey, look, you know what, we've had our differences, but it's not an excuse for me to be disrespectful to you. And you know, things got kind of smoothed out. He didn't stay long with the company, but we did smooth that thing out. So it is really important not only to recognize your own internal emotional intelligence, but how the others. In this case, it was both, right? So I do think it's worthy to look into that a little bit and learn a little bit more about it if you have some time and you're looking for some, you know, personal development in the area of communication and emotional awareness.
Great example, Tim. Thanks for sharing that one. Good. Okay. All right. So questioning skills. This is one that is often, questioning is kind of peeling back that onion, right? Although none of us really peel an onion, we usually chop it, but it's got many layers, right? And what we're trying to get to is the root of something or an issue. And question is actually a Latin word. It actually means to seek. And usually we're trying to seek answers, trying to seek a solution. Why did the fire occur? You know, why aren't we getting our reports in a timely manner? So if we're not skilled at asking the right questions, most of us will still be left with why. So it is good. We apply questioning skills in so many different areas in the workforce. The most prominent, of course, being accident investigation, the obvious. We're always asking for feedback and to resolve issues, asking for clarification. Maybe we're trying to maintain control of a conversation or maintain control of a group setting. And so we're asking more questions to maintain that control. Sometimes we're just simply trying to come up with some solutions. Now, your questioning skills, in order to be effective, we need to understand a little bit more. We need to understand what types of questions I should be asking. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Are they appropriate questions for the person or group that I'm addressing? And is my timing right to be asking these types of questions? And only these are things I don't have examples for, but you can just think in your head some situations where maybe I've posed the question and my timing was way off. And so I completely missed the mark on getting the answer I wanted because of my timing. So if our questions are ineffective, what happens? Well, many of you know from experience is it creates a lot of barriers. You know, if we're asking questions that are putting people on the defensive, you know, like Tim walking out to an employee, he was always on the defensive. He felt that next question was going to be accusatory, or that tension kind of created that. If you're trying to get to the root of a problem or situation, it stifles the flow of your information. Maybe you've got a good conversation going and you've hit upon the wrong question. So the conversation, you know how it does even a personal conversation, it just comes to a complete halt because you've asked kind of an awkward question. It can delay your efforts to get to the truth and ultimately your inability to realize or understand what truly happened. And a lot of times I go back to accident investigation because I think that's the hardest sometimes to get to, is ultimately what happened, not just carelessness or, you know, he tripped and fell or something simple, something caused the incident. So there's many questions we can ask, and here's just a handful of them. The open question, basically, you're not able to answer yes or no. These are the tell me about what happened. What occurred? What did you see? It leaves it open for a person to just kind of give as much information as they can recall. Leading questions, I don't recommend them unless you are really trying to get a biased response, essentially. You know, how satisfied were you with today's training? Like, wasn't satisfied at all. That's a leading question, right? And then there's funneling, where you take something from a really broad spectrum. You know, tell me about the accident. Tell me about what happened. And then you're going to start increasing the focus to more specifics about what they recall about the incident. Maybe it was a yellow car, a red car. Now you're getting to more specifics in a situation. So you're funneling to get to the very bottom of things. Closed questions, the obvious, everyone knows those, the yes and no questions, whether did you see the accident, did you not? And then probing, you really want some more detail. Maybe they've provided you some information like, oh, I'd like to know more, a little bit more about that. Can you explain what you mean by that? You know, why do you think this is the case? And then you have hypothetical questions. And, you know, if you can improve one thing about your job, what would it be? You know, and again, it's open-ended. It's, you've put out that, if we could improve things around here, you know, what would you like to see happen? Those are great questions, I think, for team building. Hypothetical questions are always a great option. Now, I threw this slide in here because well, we all know who Albert Einstein is, but he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on the solution, I would spend the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. For once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. And I think sometimes that's true. If we're better prepared, we have the right questions, we can get to the root of the issue in a much quicker time period. So, as I mentioned earlier, accident investigation. I know Tim's got some comments and some experiences from this. So maybe Tim, you could share some of your thoughts here on this in questioning skills.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting too, relative to questions. It's been said that the person asking the questions has all the power or has control of the conversation. And not only, and we are going to talk a little bit about accident investigation, but, you know, if you think about it with accident investigation, it's really an overlapping of not just questions, but body language and listening as well. Because if you come into the accident investigation with a predisposed idea of what went on, or just trying to check the box and move on, you're not going to determine all the variables. And trust me, all the accident investigations I've done, it's never just one thing. It's a multitude of variables. So the information that you're getting is really critical if you're going to prevent that from happening again. If you go back into that same organization where we had a process where they actually wanted me to video every accident investigation because they thought it was training. Well, what do you think that did to the people that you were videoing? Put them on edge, right? And I quickly learned that in order to assess an accident, not only did I have to have good listening skills, but I also needed to make sure that it was an environment that they were comfortable in. If I asked them into the managing director's conference room to discuss the accident that somebody was just involved in, guess what? They're going to shut down. So it's really important that you understand all these things that can influence human behavior when you're going about doing the accident investigation. So body language again. So what I would do when I started getting better at performing the accident investigations was, number one, I'd choose an environment that they were comfortable in. I'd make sure that they knew I set the parameters up front and set the parameters to say that, look, nobody's in trouble. You know, our sole purpose of doing the accident investigation, which we all know as safety professionals, is to get information so we can prevent it from happening again. It wasn't to you know, give someone a warning, verbal warning, or write them up or whatever. I'm amazed at times when I talk to someone and we'll ask them about maybe a large loss that happened, and we'll ask them, let's take lifting for example, and we'll ask their supervisor, so what'd they do wrong? Well, they lifted improperly. Well, how long they've worked here? They've worked here, I don't know, maybe 15 years. And, but they've been trained in how to lift properly. And so what'd you do about it? Well, we basically, we wrote them up because they were lifting improperly. And I said, well, you wrote the wrong person up. If you're a supervisor, you should be coaching them through that to make sure that they're doing things in the right manner. So I would set up the environment so that it was, maybe it's a picnic table, maybe it's anywhere that they would feel comfortable. Ask questions, listen, look at the body language, and then just encourage them that, look, the stated purpose of this is to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The information you share, whether it's the injured employee or the involved employee or employees or the or witnesses to it, is that we just want to prevent this from happening again. So the information that you provide is critical to that. And generally what we would find at the end is that it was probably a safe behavior, but there's also some management system that was lacking. Maybe they weren't trained properly, or maybe management wasn't coaching them when they observed them doing things improperly, or you know, a policy that needed to happen because they were trying to do too much. So it usually would be a variety. So it's really important to put on that listening hat and ask the open-ended questions, prepare before you go do it, and then just basically hear what they have to say. And if you do these things like body language or nonverbal, that you try to do things to address and get them to calm down.
Okay, good information. I've kind of summarized it here in the slide, which is what Tim was talking about, is, you know, asking questions. It requires almost everything when you're doing those accident investigations. You're asking the questions, you're having to listen carefully. Your nonverbal is playing a big part of this as to whether they feel like they're being heard. And if you're reading a little bit better that body language, what is it telling you? Are they being truthful with you? So you can kind of read a lot once you're communicating with somebody. Tells a lot, that nonverbal. All right, so some final thoughts here for you. If those of you who are in more of a leadership type position, maybe you're able to build a better communication strategy. If you're not, maybe there's some ideas you can pull away from this where you're seeking input from all the stakeholders, or, you know, even better yet, if you're not in a leadership position, you can take this information to your leadership, your manager, your safety coordinator, and talk a little bit about how you can improve communication in your organization. Listening to your employees and your leadership team are key. Prepare your managers. I see so many times where managers are thrown into a position and they're not ultimately prepared for it. You know, maybe they've been there the longest, but just because the manager's been there the longest doesn't necessarily he's well equipped or she's well equipped. So consider that when you're trying to build your strategy. Have a budget if you can for your types of communication vehicles. You know, maybe it requires some new software or wireless devices or some web application. But again, think about that before you're trying to fully develop and improve your communication. Everyone has a role in the organization. It's not just leadership. You know, everybody needs to better communicate to what's working and what's not working so that you can make improvements along the way. Set and communicate your expectations. I think we talked about that at the very beginning, and it is key. It's important. Your employees need to have that purpose and that drive of why are they there? What are they working towards? What is the goal? And last but not least, respond to your employee feedback. If any of you have like a box that says, you know, employee feedback, and you can put it in there, and yet no one looks at those but once a year, do you really think you're going to be getting any great input from your employees if they don't hear back from you? So make sure if you're going to do things like that, that you're responding back to your employees in an effective way and promptly. So here's just a few resources I've put up. There's a link. You can download this PowerPoint presentation from the handouts section. So if you open up that control panel, it will give you a handout section in a gray bar, and you can open that up, and there's that one handout. There's also a link there for managing organizational communication, a good article there from SHRM. And there's also a book that I put that I thought was well worth the read, Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High. And very well-known book. It may be something worth the read for you. So that concludes today's. Oh, Tim, did you have something?
Yeah, I just had one comment. Over the years, I've done a multitude of risk management assessments where we would go into, or I'll go into a client and we'll look from top down the entire risk management system with maybe we're trying to mitigate workers' compensation claims or other areas of risk. And I can say almost without a doubt, in every situation, there's two commonalities. One is they haven't established any goals or objectives. Like you mentioned before early on about, we're going to reduce workers' comp claims by 10% or whatever it is by the end of the year. They haven't established any goals and objectives. That's number one. Number two is that the communication isn't there. An example would be is that, I'll talk to a CEO of an organization or maybe a general manager or whatever, and they'll make just kind of, oh, what's your goals? Oh, we have a zero accident goal, which is, pardon the word, but stupid, just not realistic in most organizations. And then let's say they take that goal and you go down the chain, no one's ever heard of it. So it has to integrate with the system. We're just really talking about how to improve our management efforts. And but those are the two things that stick out. So I would encourage you to do whatever you can really to enhance the communication, because I think it'll go a long way with if you have people reporting to you or with the entire organization and the staff. So great stuff, Christy. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate you joining me today. And Ray, if there's any questions that have been posed, let us know. We're happy to answer those.
All right, no questions so far, but if anyone does have a question, you can always input it through the chat section. And if you don't have a question, but something comes up, you can always contact us at riskcontrol@alliant.com. And I want to go ahead and thank everybody for joining us today. We hope this presentation has been beneficial for you and your staff. And if you missed any portion of it, the link to the recorded webinar will be emailed this afternoon. Thank you, everyone.